My name is Steve Zeltzer. I'm with United Public Workers for Action, and we're here today at KQED where the only debate for governor is going to be held, the only gubernatorial debate in California. We have a problem with that. We think that there should be more debates, not less debates, and it's a sign of the times when the top position for governor, you only have one debate in California. Anyway, it's here at KQED in San Francisco. And we're also here today because one of the issues which we believe needs to be addressed is a massive cover-up, a $1 billion eco-fraud cover-up at Hunters Point and Treasure Island. The government, the U.S. federal government, has spent over $1 billion clean up and remediating the toxic dump sites here. And the plan that Gavin Newsom and all politicians, for that matter, in San Francisco have supported is to build thousands of condos on Treasure Island and Hunters Point Shipyard. We have to ask, why would you build condos on a radioactive dump site? And furthermore, there have been whistleblowers who have been fired for speaking up about the falsification of testing. We believe that this has to be addressed at the debate, and that the issue of health and safety, the issue of the community at Hunters Point and Treasure Island, is a question that needs to be addressed, because $1 billion has been spent of our money, of our tax money, to clean it up. It isn't cleaned up. They're still finding radioactive devices. So we're going to be addressing that here and demanding that this come up at the debate here in San Francisco for the gubernatorial governorship of California. So our first speaker is going to be Dr. Ahimsa Porter Sumshai, who is a medical doctor and a longtime researcher, activist, and getting the word out about what's going on here at Hunters Point.
So very, very much. In August of 2001, as an elected member of the Restoration Advisory Board of the Hunters Point Shipyard, I founded the radiological subcommittee of the RAB. And some of you might remember that in 2007, I made history in San Francisco. I was the first African-American woman to run citywide for mayor, and I ran against Gavin Newsom, and it was a landslide. He got all the votes, but everyone thought I was the smartest candidate in the race. But let me tell you a little bit about Gavin Newsom. One of my greatest hits in the SF Bayview, where I'm the environmental science editor, is called Singing in the Rain. Hunters Point Shipyard enriches San Francisco's most powerful families, and I can sing you a copy of that. But there is a government code, California Government Code Section 81002. It says no public official at any level of state or local government shall participate in making, or in any way attempt to use his official position to influence a government decision in which he knows or has reason to know he has a financial interest. And that is the law that existed in January of 2005 when then Mayor Gavin Newsom signed the conveyance agreement for the Hunters Point Shipyard. He had presented the 14-item legislative packet to the Board of Supervisors. His cousin, Lawrence Pelosi, who had also been his campaign manager, was Lennar's Vice President of Naval Base Acquisitions in 2004. The SF Bayview confirmed that in an email, and in May of 2004, Gavin Newsom's cousin Lawrence Pelosi left that position. Lawrence Pelosi is related by marriage to Nancy Pelosi, as is Gavin Newsom. So that's called nepotism, by the way. That you can find that definition in Webster's dictionary. One of the things that brings us by karma back to today is the fact that in 2004, after a conveyance agreement had been signed in Washington, D.C. with the Secretary of the Navy and Willie Brown and Nancy Pelosi and Gavin Newsom, the Radiological Affairs Office of the United States Navy sent a letter to Gavin Newsom saying, hey, we have concerns about the safety of this property, because a document that I contributed to called the Historical Radiological Assessment documented that the Hunters Point Shipyard was radiologically impacted, including areas where we now have residential housing, and where recently a radioactive dial, a radium dial, was discovered. In the spring of this year, I directed a letter to seated Governor Jerry Brown, emphasizing to him that we were dealing now with a statewide crisis, because in addition to the fraudulent soil samples, the 28 buildings, the radium dial, the storm drains, sewer systems, and steam lines, we have evidence that Treasure Island is radiologically impacted, and many of you know that radioactive soil that had cesium-137 was trucked out of the shipyard and sent to an unauthorized landfill, Keller landfill near Pittsburgh in Contra Costa County. So we have a statewide issue before us now, and I, as a medical doctor, feel that we are dealing with a public health emergency. So I want to make sure that the public is aware that Gavin Newsom plays a direct role in what we are dealing with now, not only at the Hunters Point Shipyard, but at Treasure Island, where he also had documented conflicts of interest via a representative, Darius Anderson, on the Treasure Island Development Commission, who funded a fundraiser for him to help him retire his campaign debt. And again, in an act of pure karma, we have it coming back to him, and we want him to address this issue as a candidate, and certainly as governor. It will be important for him to take positions that are not influenced by family, that are not influenced by politics, that are not influenced by corruption, that are not influenced by his conflicts of interest. It is time for Gavin Newsom to step up to the plate and protect human health and the environment. Thank you very, very much.
Now, one of the issues that is not, I believe, going to be addressed at this debate, gubernatorial debate, is the issue of protection of the health and safety of workers in California. Because there are only about 200 health and safety inspectors in California for 18.5 million workers in California. There are more fish and game inspectors in California than OSHA inspectors. So you have to ask yourself, where is the priority in the state of California for the protection of health and safety of workers? And this is one of the issues that we are addressing here at this press conference, because despite the fact that health and safety whistleblowers, Michael Madry, who works for Test America, and 6 whistleblowers from Tetra, which was doing the testing, have all been fired and harassed for saying that the tests have been falsified. The tests at Hunters Point Shipyard and Treasure Island have been falsified by Tetra Tech and by Test America. This is a major scandal, because Tetra Tech and Test America are one of the largest companies in their areas in the United States. They falsified the tests. And we have to ask ourselves, when you have companies, billion-dollar companies, falsifying tests here at Hunters Point Shipyard and Treasure Island, who's accountable? Who's examining that, how the falsification of testing has taken place? Because we're talking about people's lives. If you have falsified tests at Hunters Point and Treasure Island, that means people are going to get radiation. People are going to get asbestosis. They're going to get other diseases. And what we're going to be asking here for the candidates to address is what happened with Cal OSHA. Why hasn't Cal OSHA been defending the workers who were retaliated against for being whistleblowers? This is a real question. When workers complain about health and safety, you would think they would be protected. They should be protected under the law, but they're not being protected. So joining us today is Dr. Larry Rose. He's the former medical director of Cal OSHA in California. He's going to talk about this issue of the responsibility of Cal OSHA at Hunters Point, Treasure Island, and also why they are going to be doing improper retesting after spending $1 billion. Welcome, Dr. Larry Rose.
Yeah, I want to start with what my background is. I was the medical director at Cal OSHA for 30 years, and I came in with the first Brown administration, and now I'm, of course, toward the end of the second Brown administration. My interest in what's going on at Hunters Point Naval Shipyard was primarily with the radioactivity and what that history is. What is this history? What were they doing there? Well, it all started with the very, very far back with the Eniwetok hydrogen explosion. That was an enormous test in the South Pacific, and the Navy sent out a large part of a fleet to stand by there and watch it. Well, unfortunately, the hydrogen bomb was about 30% larger than they thought it would be, and it showered down on that fleet. And guess where all those members of the fleet went? They went to Hunters Point to get cleaned up. So that's where it started. And then, in addition, at Hunters Point, they were doing radiological testing on animals for about 20 years. And the question is, what were they using? Probably some of the worst fallout isotopes. My background comes from, I was a founder of Physicians for Social Responsibility way back, and our major concern was nuclear weapons and what happens when a bomb falls, and where does all that fallout go, and what is that fallout. And then at Kalusha, we would look at some of the problems with radioactive pollution in workplaces, but the main problem at Hunters Point came that they were doing uncontrolled contamination of that entire 450-acre site for years and years. And so I started looking at it closer, and I thought, well, what kind of testing was Tetra Tech doing? Tetra Tech got a contract with the Navy, and that's what that $1 billion is about. That's what they got to do the testing and to haul away what was clean and what wasn't. Well, it turns out that the testing was totally fraudulent. They were submitting fraudulent soil samples from places they knew were clean into areas and calling those areas clean also. And that's when all of the San Francisco authorities, including the San Francisco Health Department, repeatedly declared that Hunters Point is safe for construction, for residential construction and for commercial buildings. And so they thought, well, this one area way up high called Parcel A, that'll be okay because that wasn't anywhere near where all of this radioactive pollution was occurring. Well, it turns out they did almost no testing at all. They put up 450 units, unbelievable, with no testing. And then what happened was a series of revelations that, in fact, they didn't know what they were doing around Parcel A, where people are now living and have bought these condos. And these people are very alarmed, as they should be. So one of the things they just found was, hey, right at the edge of Parcel A, there's a radium device. That was another thing that they were doing at Hunters Point. They were using radium on all the ships because it glows in the dark, and you could see where the planes were landing on aircraft carriers, and they could see all their dials and equipment. So there was a lot of radium used. Well, they found it right next to Parcel A. And then the other thing that I found was really alarming was they were hauling a lot of the soil samples that they said were clear of radioactivity. These soil samples had asbestos, lead at high levels, and arsenic in them, but at levels where they could accept it at solid landfills. So one of the loads that went to one of the solid landfills, they got it out there and they said, no, the lead's too high, and they turned it around. And then they checked it, and hey, they found cesium-137 and 4 chunks of asphalt. Well, that's shocking. I mean, this shows that they didn't know what the hell they were doing, that the testing not only was inadequate, but they were trekking it out through Bayview, where people live, and who knows where else, going to these solid landfills. The other thing that I found, rather amazing, is that they located some commercial properties in areas that were polluted. In fact, there was a police department property where a police department location where all these cops were, and that was probably a polluted area that hadn't been adequately tested. And these people are alarmed, as they should be. And so you look at the whole picture of Hunters Point, not just the fraudulent and inadequate testing, but the continued pollution that hasn't been tested. What are they going to do about it? The Navy spent $1 billion. They said we're going to retest these areas. Well, who are they going to hire? They're going to hire Tetra Tech again. Unbelievable. Tetra Tech, or their management, should be criminally investigated and not being offered another contract by the Navy. And you look at the other issue. Well, who was contracted by the city, and what Dr. Hamza pointed out, to do all of the construction? That's Lennar. Well, what is this Lennar outfit? How big are they? They are huge. They were contracted to do all the building way out at Mare Island in Vallejo, also at Hunters Point, and now they're contracted to do all of the building, billions of dollars worth of building at Hunters Point. At Bayview Hunters Point. So you look at that, and you begin to see the connection to a lot of politicians that was gone into by Dr. Hamza, and that's also very shocking. And so I just want to point out, and then I'll close, is that Kalusha should have been in my old outfit, should have been into this, should have targeted that as a high hazard area. Everybody knew it was going on, but why didn't Kalusha get into it? Why didn't they do their job? Well, the problem is that Kalusha has become a basket case, almost, you might say, a non-functioning regular. They're the only regulatory agency that can do enforcement in California. They should have been in there looking at it and seeing why is it polluted, why aren't they protecting all those workers that are doing the excavation, why was nothing done? Well, I'll give you a quick history. They've cut the number of enforcement provisions at Kalusha down to a point where it's barely functioning. They can't do timely response to complaints, and they can't do good follow-up, and they can't do their job. And then Jerry Brown appointed the director of the Department of Industrial Relations. Her name was Christine Baker, to oversee. That oversees Kalusha, basically. They also do a lot of work with workman's compensation. And Christine Baker was a leader in changing Kalusha from enforcement, or not doing it, doing a weak job, to a partnership with the corporations that are where the complaints are coming in, and there are problems with health and safety. So she changed the whole focus of Kalusha, and that was a devastating blow to what was the best state safety and health program. FedOSHA agrees to state-run OSHA programs. There's one in Oregon, there's one in the state of Washington, one in California. California was the best when I went on. We had 7 physicians. When I left, I was the last doctor, and when I left, no more physicians. Well, you look at that and you say, wait a minute. Kalusha, one of their major functions is to look at the sick workers and look at their health records and to interview the doctors that are screening them, and no doctors there to do it. There are a couple of public health nurses, but in other words, a major function of Kalusha was cut. And so that's the way Kalusha is now. It's practically non-functioning. And some of that matched what happened to workers' comp. In addition, that was devastated by Christine Baker. Christine Baker suddenly disappeared about 2 months ago. What happened? Christine Baker was involved in nepotistic corruption. She had a brother there and her daughter on the payroll doing nothing. So she ran, and now Kalusha remains about in the same condition, non-functioning. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Rose. And again, this issue of the This issue of the cover-up, the corruption and Hunters Point, Bayview, it requires really criminal investigation. If I defrauded the federal government, if I defrauded the federal government of $100 or $1,000, the federal government would be after me. The question we're asking here is, you have $1 billion eco-fraud, yet there is no criminal investigation of Lenar and government officials here in San Francisco who are involved in that, and that's what we're going to be addressing. Also, what we're saying is that the state government as well is saying that it's safe. There's state investigators here saying that Hunters Point and Treasure Island are safe. Our next speaker is a resident of Hunters Point, Tondra Lowe, who's been researching for many years the health and safety conditions. Welcome, Tondra.
Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm just here to speak in solidarity. I'm a resident of San Francisco, Hunters Point. I am shocked, stunned, and amazed to see what's going on in my own backyard. I just started doing my own research. There's too many politicians who has their hands in the pot for the almighty dollar. With my health,
speak into the mic, please?
Sure, with my health being at risk. And I'm just, like I said, mine's going to be very sweet and short. And I'm just here, just in solidarity with these folks back here, and just to give my opinion. I think it's just wrong. What they're doing to the people. There's many organizations who is getting money for grants to help San Francisco's Hunters Point, and they're, like I said, getting these grants, and they're not doing anything back there. I haven't seen any flyers or anything like this, but it's just hearsay. Next time I am here on camera, I will have the names of these organizations who are out here getting this grant money to help people back there in the San Francisco Hunters Point. Thank you.
So one of the persons who's researching Treasure Island, there are now massive development on Treasure Island. There are trucks, there are construction companies, yet on Treasure Island people are still getting cancer, people are still getting contaminated, and the Navy is saying that Treasure Island is safe. We don't believe that, and the records of the contamination at Treasure Island are quite extensive. So our next speaker is Carol Harvey, who is an investigative journalist who has done many stories on Treasure Island and knows about the fraud and the corruption at Treasure Island, which, by the way, Gavin Newsom is totally aware of. He was aware of what was going on at Treasure Island as well as Hunters Point when he was mayor of San Francisco. Welcome, Carol.
Hi, yes, my name is Carol Harvey, and I've written 60 articles about Treasure Island over the last 5 years. They've been published on the San Francisco Bayview newspaper, which has an interest in both Treasure Island and Hunters Point, which I have called Siamese twins. They are literally identical. Hunters Point has 450 acres. People don't know that Treasure Island is only 400, is almost the same at 405 acres. People don't think much about Treasure Island because there's been a media blockade by the powers that be who are interested in redeveloping the place, and they're fast-tracking the redevelopment now. The Navy polluted that island with radiation, chemicals, asbestos, and mold and lead starting 61 years ago. The entire island is filled with radiation and chemicals. In 1965, around 1965, the Navy decided to build Navy housing, and they decided to build that housing at the back of the island where they had previously had burn pits. Basically, it was a garbage dump. The Navy took all of their refuse and dumped it at the back of the island on the Golden Gate Bridge side of the island, and they burned it. The problem is that when you burn the kind of trash that they had, it turns into chemicals, highly potent chemicals. In around 65, the Navy graded all that land back there by those burn pits and built housing on it for the Navy, for the sailors that they were training in a series of schools they set up on the island to teach sailors how to handle radiation in times of war. After they dropped the bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, they decided all wars from then on would be nuclear. So they started to train sailors. They set up radiation schools, and those sailors' families lived in that housing. Well, when Treasure Island was turned over, when the Navy left in about 1997, the city of San Francisco, which at that point was headed by Willie Brown, and I think it still is, that's just my opinion, decided that they would solve San Francisco's perennial homeless problem by sending homeless people out to Treasure Island and putting them in programs, subsidized programs in that housing, the old Navy housing. Well, that housing was back at that time filled, lined with asbestos, and the asbestos was later outlawed, but the housing was built over these toxic burn pits with all kinds of chemicals in the burn pits. Also, the Navy laced the entire island with radiation pieces. They called them little pieces of radiation that they wanted the sailors to find in the soil with Geiger counters as part of their training. The Navy also had set up a mock ship built. It was landlocked. It was built on the shore facing San Francisco at first. And I love this name. It was called the Pandemonium 1. And on that ship, sailors were taught to handle radiation. They were given cesium-137, and it was in liquid form, and the sailors' training was to wash the cesium-137 into the soil underneath the ship. In case of wartime, how to get rid of cesium-137? Oh, of course, you wash it away with water. That's not the way you handle radiation, but at any rate, so this island, then they moved the Pandemonium around to the other side of the island, and about 1967, and until the 70s, they continued this practice on the opposite side of the island. So this island is thoroughly saturated. They also had, with radiation and chemicals, they also stored plutonium there in a underground storage bunker, along with the cesium. And when Steve and I went out to the island last week and I gave him a toxic tour, we showed him that underground bunker. He can verify that it is in fact there where the plutonium was stored and cesium-137 was stored. So the Navy on Treasure Island has said perennially, constantly, that the island is safe, and yet they've had people living next to the cleanup zones that they have surrounded by fences with radiation signs on them. There are 5 of them. And in 2006, the Navy published a historical radiological assessment which stated in total that the island was clean, that their testing proved the island was clean. But then a reporter came in and found cesium in the soil. His name was Matt Smith. Hats off to him. He found cesium, and the California Department of Public Health came in and told the Navy to do their studies all over again. So the Navy did their studies all over again, and they did it with Tetra Tech. Tetra Tech was involved from the beginning. Tetra Tech is still involved at Treasure Island, and when the Hunters Point scandal broke about Tetra Tech, on Treasure Island, I've been to all the RAB meetings out there. They immediately tried to disappear Tetra Tech from the island. Tetra Tech was running the RAB meetings, and they set up the situation to make it sound like Tetra Tech was gone. Tetra Tech is not gone. Tetra Tech is still out there. Whistleblowers that were at Hunters Point found the same kind of malfeasance at Treasure Island. I could go on. The history is long, but the 2 places are identical, equally contaminated. Some people say Treasure Island is worse than Hunters Point. And the Navy continues to say it's safe, while people who live in that old Navy housing are getting cancers and tumors. And the latest thing I've seen is horrible butterfly rashes down the bodies of the people who are living out there now. We think that's from lead in the water that they're drinking. Thank you very much.
I doubt that they will come up with this debate, because I believe that the politicians, I believe Cox and Newsom, both of them, neither of them really want to address the issues of this $1 billion eco cover-up. And that is part of the problem, that the politicians who are supposed to represent the people of San Francisco, of California, are not being held accountable about what is happening in this state. Right here in San Francisco, where Mayor Newsom is from, Lieutenant Governor Newsom is from, where is he on Hunters Point, Bayview, and Treasure Island? Does he think it can be cleaned up? Does he think that it's safe out there? I doubt he and his family would want to live in Hunters Point and Treasure Island. In fact, the people that have bought housing at Hunters Point now are afraid to have their children out in the street for fear of being contaminated. They spent $900,000 on homes, and now they find out that the place is still contaminated. There are radioactive particles right next to Parcel A. So our next speaker is Tony Kelly, and he is running for supervisor here in San Francisco and is trying to address this issue of Hunters Point, Shipyard, and Treasure Island. Welcome, Tony.
I'm Tony Kelly. I'm a neighborhood advocate in the southeast neighborhoods of San Francisco. I'm a candidate this year for District 10 seat on the Board of Supervisors. I've also been part of the Stop Lennar action movement for about 10 to 12 years now, and that was a coalition of neighborhood groups, neighbors around the shipyard. Dr. Sumchai was part of that, members of the Restoration Advisory Board, Green Action for Health and Environmental Justice, the Nation of Islam, the Hunters View Mothers and Fathers Committee, and other advocates who worked together 10 years ago to try to raise awareness and demand a better cleanup of the shipyard then and now, and this extends to today. Now, we've been demanding a cleanup for a long time, but demands start as cries for help. And so as these two gentlemen are inside this building auditioning to be the Chief Executive Officer of the state of California, and they'll be in charge of the State Department of Public Health, which has now been tasked with the cleanup of the shipyard after the city lost trust in the Navy, after the residents of the city lost trust in the city's Department of Public Health, and after 30 years of cleanup of the shipyard, no one with any authority can say with any authority that any part of the shipyard is safe. I want to remind you of some stories because we in the neighborhood have known this for a very long time. This is not a new story in the neighborhoods of the southeast of San Francisco. So just a few people before I bring it back home to the folks inside this building right now. I'll just mention a few residents who are there today. I'm not going to mention too much about the previous whistleblowers, men like Chris Carpenter, who passed away a few years ago, was one of the first whistleblowers about what was going on at the shipyard with fraudulent cleanup of toxins. But I'll mention a gentleman up on Bridgeview. I won't mention his name right here, but he was a trucker for Lennar, and there were truckloads leaving in the middle of the night with toxic loads that weren't being scanned, and he told that to his bosses. And he doesn't believe that the shipyard can ever be cleaned up because he's seen how the cleanup has been handled, and that's why he is no longer a trucker for Lennar at the shipyard. There's a gentleman up on the Jackie Robinson Apartments up near Hudson. And I knocked on his door a little while ago, and I thought he was 66. It says officially he's 66 years old. He looks 86. He has 2 insurance companies. Those insurance companies are fighting because they can't decide whether it's the asbestos dust or the radiation that got him. There's 2 gentlemen near Harbor Road that I spoke to. One, his son was doing homework while we were talking, and he built some of the expensive condos at the shipyard. And he says, a lot of us out here, we have asthma, we have cancer. We know that the women in the southeast of the city have an 8 times higher rate of breast cancer, a 6 times higher rate of infant mortality than white women elsewhere in the city. We have up to a 14-year shorter life expectancy in the southeast part of San Francisco compared to Russian Hill. And we talked about this, and he said, hey, you got to talk to my buddies up the street near Harbor because their entire family has asthma and you should talk to them. So I went and knocked on their door. And they said, well, did you talk to our buddy down at the corner? And I said, yeah, I sure did. That's how I know about you guys. And he said, did he tell you about his kid? And I said, yeah, I talked to his son. His son was doing homework right in front of me. No. Did you talk to his daughter? His daughter who died at 20 months of age in 2012 of cancer. These stories are not unique. These stories are common in the southeast of San Francisco, just like they're common on Treasure Island. And it is on the watch of the chief executive officers of the city and county of San Francisco and the state of California that this has happened. And that's why we need to keep this in the public eye, and they need to address this as they discuss the affairs of the state in this building today. And I'll close with this. In 2010, when the final approvals were being determined for the shipyard development, Mayor Newsom's Department of Public Health and Mayor Newsom's Office of Economic and Workforce Development wrote in testimony and spoke in public at testimony before the Board of Supervisors that as of then, in 2010, the shipyard was clean and ready for development. And as of 2010, there is nothing in the soil of the Hunters Point Shipyard that cannot be touched, tasted, or breathed for 30 years daily and affect your health. That was what led to the approvals of the Shipyard development, and we know that we are still finding toxic material there today. It is time for Mayor Newsom and the corporate-controlled city establishment and government of the city and county of San Francisco to eat Shipyard dirt. It is time they own up to their responsibilities, make good on their responsibilities to the people of San Francisco, and especially the southeast of San Francisco, and tell us how they're going to protect us today when they have failed that for 30 years. Thank you for listening.
I'd like them to eat Treasure Island dirt as well.
Thank you. Now, one of the other issues, thank you, Tony, that we want to address is that in the Department of Public Health, DPH, in San Francisco, there's a environmental engineer. Her name is Amy Brunell. Amy Brunell was actually being paid for by Lennar, the developer. There was a contract between the city and county of San Francisco and Lennar, the developer, to hire Amy Brunell as an environmental engineer. Well, first of all, why would a city, a public agency, hire an environmental engineer who actually is paid for by the developer? And what Amy Brunell has been doing is telling the residents of Hunters Point, Bayview, and Treasure Island, and the workers, the city workers, that it is safe. She continues to do that, and she continues to be a city employee. Now, Amy Brunell was a city employee under Gavin Newsom. She worked for Gavin Newsom. Is Gavin Newsom going to talk about why an environmental engineer here in the city and county of San Francisco is paid for by Lennar, the developer? She continues to work for London Breed in the city and county of San Francisco. London Breed was involved in Treasure Island, where she had a position there. We're saying that these politicians have to be held accountable. Amy Brunell should be fired. There should be a full-scale investigation of the cover-up and the corruption at Hunters Point, Bayview, and also at Treasure Island. This is an issue for all the people of California, not just the people of San Francisco. As has been reported here, the contaminated material was trucked to Contra Costa and other counties, the illegally contaminated material. So we're talking about a Bay Area crisis where contaminated radioactive material is being trucked throughout the Bay Area without proper inspection, without proper controls. This is an issue that needs to be brought up at this gubernatorial hearing. I doubt it will be. That's why we're out here today, because the issues of health and safety, the issues of contamination, cancer, and the $1 billion eco-fraud at Hunters Point Bayview is an important issue for the people of California, and this has not been addressed by the governor, a lieutenant governor who aspires to be governor. Where is Gavin Newsom on the $1 billion eco-fraud? Stop the cover-up now! 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 Stop the